So Plus Ultra Civitas is a Florentine trade port, which is a really good place for one, actually. Crikey, Val. That's a hell of a victory for you. Probably sold by Aragon, and I think Aragon is literally an OPM now. Oh, I don't really know what his plans are. Coalition War release Valencia. Oh, may well have. Yeah, may well have. Mordred if I had to choose. Hearts of Iron 4, Europa Universalis. Which one did I choose? EU4 every time. I really like that. This is probably my favourite game of all time. It's close between Europa Universalis and Mount and Blade, but EU4 is just such an amazing game. The only thing is I've played too much of it, which is why I'm doing so much Hearts of Iron at the moment. Plus I really like Kaiserreich. But yeah, EU4, excellent. Like, it's just a really good game. Very, very solid. Hatred doesn't exist. That is true. There is no Emperor. Brandenburg in the first session destroyed, dissolved, removed, eradicated, annihilated the HRE. So Pharaonics currently fighting against the Crimea. Really? Where on earth is the Crimea? Oh, on behalf of Poland. Crimea is in fact in Crimea. I was like, that's Theodora and that's Genoa. Where's Crimea? But they're actually those little bits which Poland is trying to grab. Okay. So I have a feeling that there's a bunch of people here who would really like to see the Great Horde not appear next week. Or if he does, he might well get eaten up anyway. Great Horde is looking a little bit oppressed currently. That was Ethiopia. Genoa is assisting. So who is Genoa actually allied to? Because now that Genoa has left Iberia, his diplomatic situation will have changed dramatically. Holy Victor also coming in. We've had a lot of people disconnecting today. Denmark. Ulm did get bigger, yes, I noticed that. As an Opium, Aragon could move his capital to the New World, and I do suspect that's why he's on the coast over there. Do you need the DLC to enjoy, or is the base game still good? Because they've made a lot of the really important features part of the base game now, the base game's fine. Like development and estates now part of the base game, and those were like the really important things to have from the DLC. So yeah, just get the base game if you really like it, start getting DLCs. But it's absolutely worth playing. And while we're on the topic of a sale, I believe the Paradox sale is currently on. Let me just go and double check that. I'm fairly sure I'm correct in saying this. And if that is in fact the case, then I may have a thing for you. Where would they tell me? In fact, there's an easier way to check. I can just go PDX store, which should bring up the link, which is to my Paradox store link page. And there should be a button saying go to sale. There is. So if you use that link, which I just posted in chat, that is my affiliates link. And basically anything that you buy when you have that, when you've gone to the website from that link, will give me a little bit of a kickback. There is a sale on right now. It's the Midsummer sale. Midsummer's a pretty big thing in Sweden. And Paradox is a Swedish company, so they are celebrating that right now. And Europa Universalis IV is one of the games which is currently on sale. If you buy anything from the Paradox store, you will get a Steam key, so it will all work on Steam as well. And it's just more awesome if you use that link, because then I'll get a bit too.
Hello, Mordred. This is Holland.
Hello.
I have a quick question. It is not allowed to call someone in who's not here. Well, his nation. Well, he's not here, but Tia and I want to call in Cologne, who's not here, to give him a province. I mean, the war is going to be won by us, and we were just wondering if we were allowed to do that.
Has Cologne given you the okay to do it?
Not directly, but it was our plan to like expand him in northwest Germany.
Yeah, so Brandenburg's going to do that with Poland for the same thing, basically. So I would say yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
See you later.
Yep. I prefer CK2 over E4, but that's just personal preference. Still think E4 is a great game. I much prefer E4 over CK2. But I would say the same thing. CK2 is still a great game. Like, I don't think there's any Paradox game that I would have to say I dislike. Imperator, it's good for one play. I have the same problem with Imperator as I have with Stellaris. I could play one game and I really enjoy it, and then I kind of go, shall I play another one? Nah, I'd rather play E4 or Hearts of Iron or CK2. So, yeah. EU4, Hearts of Iron, CK2. Hearts of Iron, I would say, you kind of have to get Man the Guns, because Man the Guns is such a huge improvement for Hearts of Iron. But CK2 and EU4, I think you can just get base game. That was Marisi, yes. That was the Dutch. Mr. Holland himself. You don't need Waking the Tiger. I mean, the decision stuff is nice, but I wouldn't say it's a must-have, unlike the naval mechanics. How did Oman survive that war? It wasn't a difficult one. Karakanulu was a player, so he just tried to white piece him out as quickly as possible. Or as a protected nation, rather. And the rest of the stuff wasn't that big. More interesting will be to see how they manage separatists. Because right now Ethiopia is not managing their separatists. At all. They're actually losing badly against Rasangli. How'd it go so wrong? My problem with Imperator Rome was just the time period. Other than a small handful of nations have no background interest in the other nations of the time period. Yeah, I'm kind of the same thing, Grumpy Tiger. Like, I'm way more interested in Renaissance to probably late Napoleonic history, which is this. Yeah, I really like the history of this era, especially, I hate to say it, but like colonialism and stuff like that fascinates me. And also I just like the history of nations rising and falling, like France, Prussia, Iberia, the Netherlands, obviously, England, Sweden. There's just a lot of really interesting stuff happened during this era, and a lot of interesting people happened during this era. Like, remember my glee when I loaded up the American War of Independence bookmark, and there was like Frederick the Great, Catherine the Great, Maria Theresa, all around at the same time. I was like, crikey, these are some serious numbers. And like George Washington, George III, etc. They just lost land to rebels. Yeah, Ethiopia is kind of imploding. As I said before, Ethiopia expanded way too quickly and made absolutely no attempt to consolidate, which is a big mistake. My biggest gripe is how they still need to really update North America. North America is a difficult one because they need to make it interesting for the American natives, but they also need to leave enough space for colonizers. Like, that was one of the kind of problems they have with Africa, is there isn't that much colonizable land down here anymore. All the land that you have to take from the Africans is done through conquest, not through colonization. I mean, at least they still have the coast, and to be fair, during this era, they didn't really go internal. The internal conquest of Africa was done during the Victorian Age. So the coastal stuff being colonial is good, but like all of this, none of it's colonial. That has to be taken through conquest. And India, similarly. And another thing I have to say I do dislike is I would much prefer trade companies to work the same as colonial nations, because I think that trade companies actually had way more autonomy than even colonial nations at the time. Like, think of what the East India Company got up to. They had a private army, they had a private, like, citizenry almost, they had private financial and currency issues and stuff. That's way more autonomous than the United States at the time. So, Trier currently fighting against Ulm, together with Cologne and Holland. Kind of curious if they're only taking some land for Cologne, or if they're actually going to sneaky steal some stuff at the same time. The ancient world, unless localized to a set region like Total War 3 Kingdoms or Assassin's Creed Odyssey, is hard to do justice to. I think everything was a lot more localized back then. To be fair, the time when France was the strongest country in the world is my least favourite time in history. I like the Greeks and the Romans more in World War 1 or 2, of course. It's gonna be weird saying this, but I dislike World War 1 and 2 just because I covered them so freaking often in school. No, it's worse than that. We covered all the events up to World War 1, or the events after World War 1, or the events up to World War 2, and all the events after World War 2, without ever having actually covered World War 1 or World War 2. We never actually studied either of those. It was all the events running up to and the events after. I'd love to have learned military history while I was at school, but no. And the way they did the Victorian history was just boring. Which is why I think I'm so much more interested in the Age of Discovery and Renaissance. Anyway, let's go and talk about some more of the countries. So what did we get up to? We got up to Hungary, but I don't think I'm going to bother talking about them. Mamelukes, which are somewhat diminished. But that's because Bacon hasn't turned up for 2 weeks. So the first Mameluke goal is to have 1,000 development. Currently the Mamelukes are sitting on 208, so they have some expansion to do. Mamelukes, I think, are actually one of the great powers when they start. But because they've been selling so much territory and losing so much territory, they really haven't done much. They need to ensure that Egypt, the Maghreb, and the Horn of Africa are fully Islamic, so they are very similar to the Ottomans. They want to make sure that this is as Islamic, so Ethiopia is going to be up against it. And Ethiopia has been kind of lucky that the Mamluks player hasn't been here, because I suspect they would have caused him a lot more problems. The Mamluks also want to build Suez, so they want to keep control of Sharkita and Suez, so that they can build the Suez Canal. They want to have at least 50% of the trade power in Aden and Alexandria. So at the moment they have 15% of Aden and 4% of 4% of Aden and 15% of Alexandria, which is why it's so baffling that they sold Alexandria and Rosetta to Venice, because those are two centres of trade. So Venice is now the one with 39% trade power and the Mamluks are stuck with 15. So some very, 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 very questionable moves made by the Mamluks, especially as these three provinces plus Cairo are probably the most valuable in the entire Mamluk territory. And then their final objective was to own the entirety of Mashriq, Egypt and the Anatolia regions. So again, they've just given up one of their goals because they don't have Egypt, and then they needed Mashriq and Arabia. So if we go to the regional map mode, they need to have all of this and all of this as well. Bet they did it for the goods produced bonus. It's possible, but I don't think the goods produced in this area are massively valuable. They lost their spice province. They do have one gem and one paper, one cloth. Otherwise it's cattle. Cotton's alright. It's majority cattle though. Production 0.2, 0.1, 0.1, 0.09. Even the gems are giving them almost nothing. Yeah, not the greatest move ever. And then we'll move over to Muscovy, which has been ballooning recently. No one's really tried to put a dent into Muscovite growth. And Muscovy's just basically been playing single player, just like grub, nom. So their objective, and this is an interesting one, own Constantinople. So they want to try and take Constantinople from the Ottomans. Who are the Mamluks actually allied to at the moment? Who are Muscovy allied to? This is something we've not really looked at. They're allied to Sweden and Poland. So the two nations whose job ostensibly is to take Muscovy down, they are actually allied to. This is like France and England being allied again. Ah! Alright, fair enough. They also need to own the entirety of the Baltic, Ruthenia and Pontic steppe regions. So this is where the rivalry with Poland really arises. They need to own all of this, and all of this. And right now, they own none of it, really. I mean, they are going to have a bit of a rivalry with the Great Horde eventually. Great Horde currently being eaten up by Kazan. But I think the main fight would be against Lithuania, which is going to be Poland and Lithuania. How close is Muscovy to forming Russia? I think very close. And Russia is not one of their goals because it's not actually that difficult. In fact, I think they have everything except for the Admin 10. Yeah, they're the same as Holland, as the Netherlands. They're just waiting for Admin 10. Then we've got own Western Alaska and the Alaska Panhandle areas. So whereas Muscovy is currently going for this, Muscovy really needs this. So if we go again to the area map mode, we can see that the Alaskan Panhandle and Western Alaska, they need to own all of this, either as a colonial nation or as their own territory. It doesn't really matter so long as they have it, because historically Alaska was Russian before they sold it to the Americans after the 7 Years' War. I think that's when it happened. No, it was later than that. No, it was after the war of the Crimean War. That was it. I knew it was after a war. And that's why they didn't sell to the British, because they just lost to the British in Crimea. Even though Britain owned Canada, so it would be the more obvious person to have sold it to. Muscovy wants to have a standing army of 500,000. This one is conditional, so it can be temporarily lost if they go below. Although since writing that, I've added a bunch more conditionals. So if you go to the goals spreadsheet, anything in purple is conditional, so you have to constantly complete that clause in order to get the completion. And then finally, they need to own Finland and the Ostrobothnia area, which is what puts them into conflict with Sweden, because they need to take these two. To be fair, in France we cover World War I and World War II twice, when we were 12 and then 17, but spend way more time on the causes and consequences. I think it's logical from a pedagogic point of view. It's the same for the Napoleonic Wars. As a matter of fact, France was in way too many wars for history classes to spend time on the wars themselves. I mean, it was actually really interesting. We were in a history class, and we were talking about the lead up to the First World War. And our teacher said, what was the previous war to this one? Like, a really big war. What happened prior to the First World War? And we were like, 30 Years' War? It's like, nah, it's a bit too far back. War of Independence? A bit closer, but still not there. Before First World War. 100 Years' War? It's like, no, don't be silly. None of us said Napoleonic. Didn't even occur to us, because we never actually studied Napoleonic War, or the causes, or the after effects. Which is bloody bazonk... weird, because it was kind of a big deal for England at the time. But not once did we study the Napoleonic Wars. We studied industrialization, which was post-Napoleonic. And that was it, really. We studied, like... We didn't really do the War of Independence, but we definitely did British colonialism and the 13 colonies. Have they managed to drop somehow on the precise Russian-Finnish border? I think so, yeah. I think they have. Didn't Sweden own this? I could have sworn that Sweden owned Kola. Because I think that Sweden took this from Novgorod. I wonder if Muscovy's bought them. I'm still very curious about why Sweden sold this to Denmark. I'm not curious, I actually have a very good idea why, but I'm not going to say. But I'm also curious, like, why? Players are a lot more likely to sell provinces in this than I would be if I was playing. It's kind of interesting.